had he gotten reelected, it would have been a very narrow, close race, but he might have won. 8 years of George Moscone, you can begin to build the progressive infrastructure that has never been built in San Francisco.
That was author and Columbia University professor Lincoln Mitchell. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco, a podcast about artists, activists, and small businesses that make this city so special. In this bonus episode, Lincoln and I chat about his new book, 3 Years Our Mayor, George Moscone and the Making of Modern San Francisco. The book is out now at independent bookstores all over the city. Lincoln will be in San Francisco doing talks about his new book over the next few weeks, well into May. The first of these is next Tuesday, April 29th, when Lincoln will talk with SF State Professor Emeritus William Issel at the Rorschach from 6 to 8 p.m. Go to lincolnmitchell.com/3yearsourmayor for more info. Here's Lincoln Mitchell.
I grew up in San Francisco. I have kind of split my life between New York and San Francisco. And the shorthand for that is that when I was growing up in San Francisco, a constant background music of my life was my friends telling me, dude, mellow out, because that was the New Yorker in me. And then when I got to New York and went to grad school, I constantly was getting my fellow students saying, why don't you not stressed out about grades? And that was the Californian in me, because performing stress is a very New York thing to do. Understanding that we should manage and not kind of celebrate stress is a very San Francisco thing. I grew up in the Cow Hollow neighborhood, which is relevant here for, among other reasons, is where George Moscone grew up. I attended Catholic school for 10 years, and to some extent, attending Catholic school is a rite of passage in San Francisco. It's something so many of us have done, even those of us who are Jewish. And, I have a friend here in New York who we lost one of our members when Dianne Feinstein died, but he's also another Jew who went to Catholic school in New York. And I say that a little bit to be silly, but also I think it's important. The role of the church and the Catholic institutions in San Francisco is often so overlooked, but it's so important. And I have, I love San Francisco, and I'm one of these San Franciscans who is deeply curious about the city, how it got to be so an unusual city, and today I would say such a misunderstood city. And I've tried to explore that in my academic writings. I'm a political scientist by training, but to bring in part of the culture. So one of my books, it was a book about politics, but also a book about baseball and punk rock, because I don't think you can really understand San Francisco politics without understanding the San Francisco culture. And I'm also a product of a time, right? I'm Generation X. And there's the ultimate Generation X experience is being mistaken for a boomer, but I'm not a boomer. And what that means is that I grew up hearing, gosh, it's too bad you missed the summer of love. I had a pretty good excuse. I wasn't born until December of that year.
Right, yeah.
But, so I saw kind of, and remember in San Francisco, the 60s lasted well into the 80s. So, the tail end of that. And then I'm a Giants fan going back to the Bobby Mercer days, and hearing so many of the older people behind me at Candlestick Park through our clothes that we were, bundling ourselves up with, telling me how unfortunate it was that I never saw Willie Mays play there. And I never did. But I did see Willie McCovey when he came back, and he became, like many of my generation, our favorite Giant ever.
But you were growing up and forming in San Francisco, constantly reminded of all the things that you missed. Is that what you're?
I mean, to some extent, yes. But I was also, there was so much to enjoy. But there's this moment in San Francisco where it goes from kind of the boomers who, the summer of love, which is celebrated well into the 21st century, and then these tech people take in a different direction. And those of us whose San Francisco was centered in a different historical period are often overlooked, but I want to bring that period out. The punk rock movement that was so important, those Giants teams in the late 80s that were so good, the role, a little more conservative than my taste, but the role that Dianne Feinstein played in remaking the city and also making a hybrid model of governance that is how all cities are governed. The leap from Dianne Feinstein to Michael Bloomberg to New York is pretty straightforward.
Right. Right. And you mentioned that in the book.
Yes.
So there's a million places I could begin. One of the things that struck me from our recording 5 years ago was that you had written the book that you were talking about then was Year Zero, which is all about 1978 and those three elements, the murders, the giants, and punk rock. But you had kind of hinted, you're like, for something that I'm researching, a book I'm researching now, which I'm guessing is the book that you're here to
Yes.
talk about. And I was like, oh, the new book, 3 Years Our Mayor, is the prequel.
To some extent, yes.
And I mean, not to diminish what it is, but I mean, is that accurate? It's like you laid some groundwork in Year Zero, but this is like, okay, here's how we got there.
That's right. And Year Zero for me, San Francisco Year Zero, was a book that had been in my mind for a very long time. I mean, to some extent, since that 1978 baseball season.
Mm.
There was something special going on at Candlestick Park that year, and then the year ended the way it did, and I
Mm.
was 10 years old. I turned
Yeah, I was
11
gonna
shortly
say.
after the assassinations, and it really stuck in my head. So that was something I felt that it was important, and it was a good kind of way to kind of put a stake in the ground that I'm someone who can write seriously and thoughtfully about culture, politics, and history.
Hmm.
And then in writing that book, and then as times went on, and in San Francisco, two things became clear. One, that nobody knows anything about the history of San Francisco. Most people's understanding of the history goes something like this: gold rush, earthquake, summer of love, assassinations, tech. That's it. And how can we try to understand the complex politics, culture, and society in San Francisco if that's all we know? And then what became clear to me is that over time, George Moscone has become, at the time of the assassinations, which I cover in the book, it's the Moscone and Milk assassinations. Now, when you read it, even in the Chronicle, who should know better, it's the Milk and Moscone assassinations.
Hmm. Yeah.
And obviously, Harvey Milk has eclipsed George Moscone because Milk has become a global civil rights icon, rightly, right, deservedly.
Hmm.
But the problem there is that George Moscone, who was so instrumental in the making of modern San Francisco, the making of modern progressive San Francisco, and to some extent, how progressive San Francisco gets stymied over and over again,
Hmm.
which is to me is such an important part of the story. And George Moscone captures that. And then the more I learned about George Moscone, the more you realize what a great San Francisco story it is. So for someone like me who doesn't just want to write about the politics, the fact that he's an all-city basketball player, like that's fascinating to me. The fact that he grew up in Cow Hollow, going up north to hang out with his grandfather, and that whole story, and how he's embedded in the Catholic school kind of anthropology of the Catholic anthropology of the city, and his journey from being, he was born in 1929, um, as a Catholic Italian guy who moves leftward, as opposed to
Hmm.
so many others who move rightward. And how that
Right.
happened, to me, this is just a great way to tell the San Francisco story for a guy who was really a prince of the city who was killed too soon.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, he defied, I don't know if it's expectations or norms or like what you just touched on about who he was in his identity and where he took his own politics. Do you, in your research and your writing, do you think that is something that maybe is a mixture of just who intrinsically he was and some of the factors of his upbringing and or external factors, the influence of the Burtons, the influence of Willie Brown, et cetera, et cetera? Was it
And
one or
this
the other or both?
this is the theme I wrestle with throughout the book.
Yeah.
Why did George Moscone become a progressive city council member of the supervisors, state legislator, and then mayor? Why didn't he just become another affluent lawyer? Go to St. Ignatius, end up what was then called Hastings, and get a good job at a law firm downtown. And I think you touched on a couple things. That it was the Burtons who really brought him into politics.
Mm.
And they paved the way, and they recognized something special about George Moscone that they didn't have.
Mm.
Phil Burton may have had a sharper political mind than George Moscone. He may have had a sharper political mind than anybody in our time. But Phil Burton was never going to get elected mayor of San Francisco. He didn't have the magic that Moscone had. Moscone was a good-looking guy. Moscone, at a time when it mattered, had been an all-city basketball player, went to St. Ignatius, was Italian-American when that really mattered. So there was a kind of a political marriage there, where once
Mm.
Burton realized that Moscone was down with the progressive politics, he could really elevate him. And then, Moscone and Willie Brown meet sweeping floors as janitors
Right.
when they were in law school together at what was then Hastings. And
I
Willie
love
Brown
that
at that
story.
time is a progressive civil rights leader. He's moved, rightward, and he's gotten, much older. Willie Brown and John Burton are still alive, so they've lived a lot longer than the others. But that brings him in too. And then the other piece that I wrestle with is that there is just something about who he is, right? And a lot of people that I spoke to attribute it to playing basketball all over the city, going playground to playground. And whereas there's no doubt in my mind that Moscone's love for San Francisco came from that, just being in these different neighborhoods. I did not play basketball. I played baseball in every playground in San Francisco, and I felt some of that. And I still feel that when I'm walking around San Francisco and I go by Crocker Amazon or somewhere. I think, wow, I remember playing ball there, or Big Rec, or what's now Moscone Field. But
Can I just interrupt really
yeah,
quickly, Lincoln, because you're talking about now there's a thread between your own life and Moscone's. Can you articulate what that is? Like, is it, yeah, that's the question.
what that threat is,
What
or what that
that
feeling
feeling
is.
that you
Yes.
get. Yeah.
I mean, okay. So one of my macro theories about San Francisco, and I think I'm right about this, and for me, this is why San Francisco is such both just a great place and an unusual place in the best sense of that word. San Francisco is simultaneously much bigger and much smaller than you think it is at any given time. So, for example, let's say that you live in the outer Richmond. Let's say that you live at 39th and Cabrillo. I am the kind of San Franciscan who think that's a great and romantic neighborhood in which to live. Not everyone may agree, but I'm standing by my subjective opinion. You can stay between, let's say, Geary and Golden Gate Park, 30th and 40th Avenue for a week. Got everything you need. There's that stretch of Balboa. There's great restaurants. You can get groceries. You can walk over to the park. Or you can get up in the morning, meet a friend for breakfast in the Marina District, have lunch in the Mission, and dinner in, I don't know, the Outer Sunset. So it can either be a tiny village that you never leave, or a global cosmopolitan city that you can move around much faster than New York or London or somewhere like that, or Mexico
Mm,
City, another great global
mm,
city.
mhm,
And well, the reason I bring it, so let's go back to the baseball and the basketball.
mhm,
When you're playing sports like that, and it doesn't have to, I don't want to make it like a male thing, like you have to be on the field, but you can imagine you're doing poetry in all these different neighborhoods, whatever it is, you're getting out and you're getting embedded in these communities. So you're not just driving through, but you're sitting there. And in my case, unlike George Moscone, I spent a lot of that time sitting on the bench. He did not sit on the bench as much as I did, but he's a better athlete. And when you're sitting on the bench or even, playing basketball or sitting there, he played second base, I played first base, but sitting there in the infield, getting ready to the ball come to you, you're hearing things, you're seeing things, you're driving out there. You're getting a feel for how those neighborhoods are both different and the same.
mm.
And that to me is very powerful. But I also want to add, like I had teammates, of course, baseball is both a team and an individual sport. And I played with people who you would go out to the Mission or even the Fillmore back then, and my teammates would make racist comments. How
Sure.
come these people who don't look like me, how come their neighborhood is poorer, and how come their neighborhood is dirtier? It must be because there's something wrong with them. Now, that to me
Yeah,
is a racist understanding of the world. Other
sure.
people might say, we're all just playing basketball here. Why do they not have the opportunities that I have? And
Mm,
that's clearly where Moscone came from, where
mm.
Moscone got to. And so basketball, I think, helped, but it helped something that was already existing there.
Maybe at the time they used this word. Now I think of part of it is charisma, right?
Yes.
That's what we call it. I'm thinking like, you know, around 2000, we kind of elected a president who was more known for his swagger and his charisma than me. But now contrasting that with George Moscone is that he had the charisma, he had the riz, as the kids say,
Right.
but he also had the substance,
It was also
right?
coming with, yeah, I mean, charisma also, he's a good looking guy, right? We have to remember that. I mean,
Yes.
I talk to people, the man's been dead since 1978, and people now in their 80s, and they will stop and tell me how good looking he was,
Yeah.
right? So, but he did the work.
Yeah.
He did the work. He did the work as a candidate, the shoe leather, walking the city, shaking hands everywhere. He knew people everywhere. And in the legislature, he did the work of passing important legislation. Well, look, I mean, this is on balance, I come out on a side that believes George Moscone was, a good legislator and a good mayor. He's not perfect, right? I don't want
Sure.
people to think that this is a hagiography. He's not
Mm.
perfect. There are flaws. There are mistakes he made along the way. We can get into that or not, but I mean, this is somebody who probably would be Me Too'd out of politics today,
Right.
right? I mean, what seems as charisma and womanizing reads very differently in the 21st century, appropriately. And you
Sure.
see this. I mean, John Burton at one point says, we were talking about broads, which is John Burton's word, not mine. But
Right.
I don't know if I mean, I have two kids, but if I'm married with two or three kids and another on the way, maybe I'm not hanging out with the guys talking about broads. Maybe I should be home taking, you know what I'm saying? So we don't want to overstate all of this.
Sure. And then going back to my question about sort of like how George Moscone formed his own worldview and his own politics, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And of course, there's no easy, simple black and white answer. But I think part of it, and I think you do a great job of this in the book, is that he maintained an open mind, especially in his formative years, especially meeting Willie Brown when they were janitors, like as you. So I think that's a huge part of, and I feel like he maintained that through his
It
life.
just
He let himself be open, not only to ideas, but to the world around him and figuring it all out and figuring what to do about it.
I mean, I think to some extent, good politicians have to have a happy disposition
Mm.
because otherwise, and we can look at our current president, among other of his many flaws,
Do
it's
we have
so
to?
easy. No, but
Let's.
otherwise, it's so easy to see everything as an offense and be
Mm.
aggrieved about everything.
Hmm.
But if you go into the world thinking, I can make a difference, I basically like people, you
Mm.
have a different outlook. Now, if you go into the world that way, it helps the people if the world sees you that way. And George Moscone is at a historical moment where as a good-looking, charismatic white guy, the world does see him that way. And I think so. I think
Right.
that's part of the dynamic. And I would also add that the challenge of that kind of Burton's Brown Moscone group, which beginning in the mid '60s, well, through much later, but certainly through Moscone died in '78, Burton in '73, right?
Bill. Right.
Burton '83, sorry, '83.
Hmm.
They're navigating this changing city.
Mm.
And that's very difficult. There's so much going on in the city. As late as 1960, San Francisco was 90% non-Latino white.
Right.
By 1970, that's totally different. But as
Hmm.
late as 1960, basically almost all gay people were closeted.
Hmm.
By 1970, 1975, 1980, that is certainly beginning to change.
Right.
And different people in San Francisco respond to that differently.
Mm.
And what I think the Burton saw was political opportunity. What Willie Brown came at it as was he was at that. Remember, Willie Brown is an early and powerful advocate for African American civil rights in San Francisco in this time period. And that
Hmm.
he sees that as his mission, and he's a very, very powerful advocate for African Americans, for which, regardless of what you think of him as mayor and everything like that, we need to give him credit for that.
Sure.
And Moscone sees that, but he also he's there's this duality to Moscone. And I will tell you this story that's in the book for those of you who can read it. But on the one hand, I mean, I hope you all will read it. On the one hand, he is, you know, uh, embracing the changes and he's harvesting votes there.
Mm.
So among the neighborhoods where he cleans up in that 75 election, and I do some precinct analysis, it's not too political sciencey, but it's nonetheless interesting in the book, are the Western Addition and the Fillmore Bayview Hunters Point, where he's getting above 90% in some of those precincts. Those are
This
that's
is
a
Moscone we're
in
talking about in
75 against
75.
Joan
Yes.
Barbour-Gelada. In a narrow election, he wins very narrowly. He's getting 90% or more in some of those precincts.
Hmm.
In other words, huge black vote. And he was a guy
Hmm.
who had a very strong record on civil rights. Willie Brown just went the extra mile over and over again for George Moscone in that election. So Brown, again, playing an instrumental role. And in the Castro, the heart of the
Mm.
Castro, he's getting 2/3 to 75% of the vote in the runoff.
Amazing.
Now, In the first round, Dianne Feinstein, who got eliminated in the first round, but also had a good record on gay votes, was on gay issues, was pulling some of those votes away. But in the second round, two Italian American candidates, and one is, pardon my language, beating the crap out of the other with the gay vote.
Mm.
Rightly, if you saw the record. I mean, John Barbagelato was a little bit like Mark Farrell in the recent election, where he almost couldn't bring himself to say gay or something like that, right? So,
Right.
so that's a newer kind of Democrat. Always were gay people in San Francisco, but there's more, and they're out in a different way. And Moscone, who passed a law along with Willie Brown, along with Governor Jerry Brown, and Leo McCarthy, of course, to decriminalize consensual sex between two people of the same gender,
Hmm.
is so he's done his work. But even in the Haight-Ashbury,
Mm.
right? Now, the Haight-Ashbury is at that time still where the kind of newer, lefty, hippie-ish vote is. He does very well there. So in that 75 election, Moscone's the face of New San Francisco, Barbagelato of Old San Francisco, and Moscone wins. On the other hand, Moscone, went to St. Ignatius.
Mm.
Barbagelato went to Galileo. But so his children at that point are relatively young. The boys, John and Chris, are going. Chris may have started high school by then, but they go to Notre Dame de Victoire, which is a very kind of ritzy Catholic boys' school. They later go on to St. Ignatius, and there's a wonderful discussion that about John Moscone going to St. Ignatius, which I'll save that for people who want to read the book because I want to spoil everything. The girls go to the Convent of the Sacred Heart, which is the elite fancy Catholic school. So there's a paradox in Moscone that he has a foot in both of these San Franciscos. And that can be a disadvantage or it can be a political advantage in the right political hands.
That's yeah, that's all. It's reminding me of some of the sort of contradictions and dualities that have persisted in the city, which we don't have time to go into. One thing I do want to perhaps end with, or get us toward the end of this episode, would be, can you talk about, and I guess it'll have to be a little bit superficial because of time, but like the legacy of all this that culminates in the assassination since then leading us to now. And I don't know if this is a caveat or just like a something that's on my mind, and that has been since November of 2024, is that I moved here in 2000. So, toward the end of Willie Brown's reign. And in 2024, in November, Daniel Leary was not my candidate, but for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that for the first time in 25 years, someone outside of that sphere, out of that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So anyway, can you take us maybe in 5 minutes, take us from 1978 to 2025?
Well, the amazing thing about what you're commenting about Daniel Lurie
Mhm.
is that in 2024, before the election, the mayor of San Francisco, the speaker emeritus of the House of Representatives, the vice president, who's also a Democratic nominee for president of the United States, were all directly or indirectly products of the Burton political operation, the Burton Brown political. That's how long the impact was here.
Right.
I think that the answer to your question, my take on San Francisco, which is not always the same as everyone else's, is that we can only understand San Francisco if we stop thinking about it as a uniquely progressive city.
Right.
And
Agreed,
that was
100%.
true in 1975 when Moscone narrowly won this election and then couldn't implement anything
Mhm.
particularly progressive. All he could do was remake the commissions and the boards and make them much more diverse, which he did, and which, to her credit, Dianne Feinstein and every mayor since continued to do. And from my particular passion, his first 3 months in office was taken up with trying to keep the Giants in town, and he succeeded there. And for me, that's, I love baseball. That's very important. But I think that the had he lived, had he gotten reelected, it would have been a very narrow, close race, but he might have won. 8 years of George Moscone, you can begin to build the progressive infrastructure that has never been built in San Francisco. Never.
Mm.
And we see this in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of strange ways. I mean, I think the issue of affordability around housing, but also around other issues, is absolutely central to San Francisco. But New York City has all kinds of affordable housing programs going back for decades that never existed in San Francisco. Just all
Right.
kinds of interesting ways to ensure that middle-class people can stay here. Public transportation now we have money going in to destroy public transportation so that everyone can get around in automated vehicles because that'll be cheaper and better for this craziness. But it was never as good. It was better than other places, but never as good as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what Moscone might have been able to do and remember, when he was assassinated, the president of the Board of Supervisors was Dianne Feinstein, a centrist Democrat. The morning of the assassinations, she said she knew what was going to happen, which is this: Don Horanzi, who Moscone was going to appoint to Dan White's seat, would assume that seat. He would have voted for Gordon Lau, who was a progressive representing essentially what's now Connie Chan's district, District 1 out in the Richmond district. And now Moscone would have had a progressive majority on the board and himself as mayor, and we've never had that in San Francisco.
Right.
And we've never had that. And other cities have.
Yeah.
So that's the moment of missed opportunity. And where that leads, there's no way to know. George Moscone, I mean, the horrors on the human level of the assassinations of George Moscone and Harvey Milk cannot be understated, right?
Right.
And that this sick, evil man was manipulated by the police to do this cannot be forgotten. But and where both of these people were going, I'm talking about Moscone and Milk now, in terms of their political futures, that belongs to the agonizing category of what might have been, and that's all we can really know for sure.
Right. Yeah, and just I that fact of literally that day the board could have flipped is just
everything would have been
mind-boggling, bananas.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are running out of time, so anything else? Maybe can you tell folks where, when, how,
Yes.
how not, if you want to get the book?
So the book is called 3 Years Our Mayor, George Moscone and the Making of Modern San Francisco. The publisher is the University of Nevada Press. I don't want to say they've just been a pleasure to work with. The publication date is April 8th. I'm going to suggest a few ways to get it, and then maybe some ways not to get it.
Please.
So just my subjective view of things, I'm not really interested in sending any more money Jeff Bezos' way, so maybe you don't go to Amazon. Many of the local bookstores in San Francisco will carry it. I've been speaking to people there. I know that Green Apple, which is in my neighborhood, I talked to the people at City Lights, Alvin Orloff at Dog-Eared Books at He'll carry it. Awesome. I also have a number of events coming up in San Francisco.
Oh, excellent.
Around the book. And if you go to these events, the advantage is I can give you a discount on the price and I'll sign it for you.
Yes.
And what I would say is if you want to go to those events, the best thing to do is to either email me. I mean, I don't think everyone's going to, but you're welcome to email me. My email is simple, lincoln@lincolnmitchell.com. Or you can go to my website, www.lincolnmitchell.com, and then there's one of the menu items says 3 Years Our Mayor. If you click on there and scroll down, I'll be uploading the events. But the first one is April 29th at the Rorschach, and we're really trying to put a great exhibit together on May 28th at the Savoy. And if we can put this together, it'd be great, because if you're familiar with the photographer Dave Glass,
oh yeah,
he would be doing photographs. And I will be talking about the book, and you can see Dave's
saw
photographs.
some Dave Glass photographs in the book, correct?
Yes, and Dave, I could have just done a book of only Dave Glass photographs, but
sure.
He was been super helpful on this and just a great dude. So that'll be a fun event as well. And there's more in between, and those will be on the website soon. So that's how you can find out about that. Or just go to Green Apple or City Lights. And if your local bookstore in the city doesn't have it, ask them to order it.
There you go. Awesome, Lincoln. Well, thank you not only for coming on the show, but also for all of your work. I mean, for you, your passion is a given for this city. But those of us who also love it, I just appreciate all the work you put in. It's excellent.
Thank you. And just very briefly, if you want more of my writing, you can subscribe to my Substack, Kibitzing with Lincoln. There's a free option. There's a paid option. I will give a warning that there's always a little bit of baseball. Today, there's a 900-word essay about Hoyt Wilhelm. But there's a lot of politics there as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lincoln.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That was Lincoln Mitchell, author of 3 Years Our Mayor. On the next episode of Storied SF, meet 415 Zine's founders and publishers, Lane Wieseman and Alfredo Sainz. Episode 13 drops next Tuesday, wherever you get podcasts. Music for Storied San Francisco was created, curated, and produced by Otis McDonald. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in the 7th season, we have more than 250 episodes available wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the refreshed website, which I'm still working hard to repopulate with all the episodes. That's storiedsf.com. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the show. You can also rate us on Spotify. Find us on Instagram and Blue Sky at storiedsf. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay weird, stay informed, keep your eyes open, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco. We acknowledge and respect the first humans of the unceded land we call San Francisco, the Ramaytush Ohlone. We condemn the genocide of these and other tribes across the Western Hemisphere. We honor their legacy and history, and we support rematriation and sovereignty efforts.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.